I am a major fan of RGG, not of their more recent decisions, but a fan nonetheless. Like many, I started getting into the fandom around the time Yakuza 0 was blowing up and had everyone and their mother talking about it. I'm also someone that had recently made a reaction to their Stranger Than Heaven trailer. Link in the description. And suffice to say, I am most certainly giving this game a chance when it comes out winter of this year. But that's not why I'm here today. My goal for today's video is to essentially peel back the lyrics of the highly esteemed song present in said trailer. I by no means am a lyricist, songwriter, or producer. All I really have in terms of experience when it comes to this sort of stuff is me having sung or performed in the past. And again, this is mostly just for the sake of fun rather than it being an actual professional analysis. I will also be singing portions of the song bit by bit in order for us to essentially extract and just understand, and I apologize if my singing abilities aren't necessarily up to par, especially compared to the singers on the song itself. Without further ado, let's begin. I found a place where I'm not alone. The first line refers to the central idea of this game. From what we've been able to see, the game is quite literally going to be all about trials and tribulations of what it meant to immigrate to a completely new environment that you're unfamiliar with. Makoto Daito, a mixed Japanese-American, heads into 1900s Japan with what seems like the pursuit of basically starting over. It does appear that during his time growing up, he and his family were constantly discriminated against because of his mixed heritage, and simply because he was a minority, which would eventually then fuel his fire for searching for a new home. As the lyrics depict, a place where he's not alone. Tore down the gates, took all my pain and made a weapon. In my opinion, the gates in this line symbolize the barriers placed around him by both cultures, the kind of social gatekeeping that isolates people of mixed descent, especially back during the 1900s, where it was seen as even more impure or bad than it is in modern day to some people. Makoto then takes all of that pain and turns it into fuel, forging a weapon out of his conviction to become something greater rather than simply being cast aside by society. You know I could take you somewhere, oh, stranger than heaven. This part I feel refers to Orpheus, the guide for Makoto. It's almost like he's the one who wrote or is singing this specific line. Orpheus is an interesting figure because I highly doubt RGG simply chose that name because it sounded cool. From what I've heard, it's a reference to Greek mythology. He was a legendary musician whose music was said to move the hearts of people and even the gods themselves. He was also heavily associated with tragedy and journeys into the underworld. Considering just how heavily Stranger Than Heaven appears to focus on music, suffering, and identity based on the trailer, I genuinely do think that this parallel is not accidental whatsoever. Orpheus essentially serves as Makoto's guide into Japan's criminal underworld, which in this case they find to be Stranger Than Heaven itself. Boom. Backstreets walking on the edge of the night. Backstreets in many cultures are known for their seedy reputation. They are often places associated with gang activities, drug deals, trafficking, and all sorts of illegal operations taking place behind the public eye. Right away, the song establishes an atmosphere that feels dangerous and unstable. Walking on the edge of the night feels, at least to me, like both wordplay and a double entendre. Normally, the phrase would be, of course, walking on the edge of a knife, refers to the uncertainty and danger, the feeling that one wrong move could completely change everything. Here, however, they replace knife with night, which I believe is intentional because nighttime itself is heavily associated with criminal activity and the hidden side of society. The edge of the night could also refer to those late hours around 3 a.m. and beyond, where cities begin to feel even almost surreal, liminal. The streets become quieter, yet somehow more dangerous at the same time, as that's when activity, like the ones we're conducting in the game, begin to be on the rise. Senses sharper than the edge of a knife. Well, this part is rather self-explanatory. A sharpened knife is dangerous, precise, and of course, unforgiving. And I believe the lyric uses that imagery to describe that kind of awareness and instinct required to survive in the underworld that Makoto has found himself in. One wrong move, one wrong person trusted, and it's game. Like, just gone. Looking to my left, something don't feel right. Yet another double entendre. On the surface, the lyric refers to constantly looking around in order to maintain a sense of safety, making sure that you are not being followed, watched, or stalked. Looking over your shoulder is practically a requirement in a world filled with crime, such as this. And, well, people who don't mind stabbing you just because you're an inconvenience. They then follow it up with, of course, something doesn't feel right, which not only reinforces that feeling of paranoia, but also hints at the idea that things are not exactly what they seem. It simultaneously conveys both physical caution and emotional distrust. Which roughly translates to, in an era that is simply becoming more and more chaotic, which speaks about the instability of the times, not only for those within the underground, but also for the average person just trying to survive day by day. Considering the historical periods that Stranger Than Heaven takes place in, this line could, of course, very easily be referring to social unrest, rising crime, poverty, political tension, and the overall uncertainty that many people would have been experiencing during those eras. All of this culminates to make the world itself feel unstable. The chaos is not limited to criminals or gang members. It feels systemic, as if society itself is beginning to fracture, which then naturally explains why people like Makoto may end up gravitating towards the underworld in the first place. Because when conventional societal systems fail the people, many eventually begin searching for belonging and survival elsewhere. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Roughly translates to something along the lines of, what is the hidden land that once shined brightly? And I believe this line could potentially refer to Makoto's idealized perception of Japan slowly fading over time. At first, Japan may have represented a shining land to him, a place where he could finally belong after spending his life feeling alienated because of his mixed heritage. We quite literally see Orpheus mention this to him about, that right there, that's the Japan you're dreaming about. However, as the game progresses across multiple decades, that dream may slowly fade away. The land that once shone brightly in his eyes gradually transforms into something far darker, a world filled with violence, corruption, and emotional isolation. In a sense, the very place he once viewed as salvation ultimately becomes his tomb. This specific line roughly translates to, this blood of determination boils within me, then acts almost as a direct response to this realization. Despite the chaos, suffering, and everything that surrounds him, Makoto continues to move forward through sheer conviction alone. I also believe there may be an element of the sunk cost fallacy present here, because by this point, Makoto may have already sacrificed too much of himself and everyone else to truly turn back. This is the beginnings of the Tojo clan after all. Samayou kurai kurai machi roughly translates to wandering through a dark, dark city, which of course is a callback to earlier references to back alley seedy spots that the general public never would step into. Akari no tomoshikata sushiras roughly translates to not even knowing how to light a light. And I believe this line operates on both a personal and societal level. On one hand, it reflects Makoto's emotional state, wandering through a dark and unfamiliar world without truly knowing how to guide himself forward. The light, in this case, symbolizes hope, direction. It could also symbolize the initial incompetence or growing pains that Makoto goes through before he reaches the top of the food chain. As RGG has always been a franchise that was willing to critique the sort of failures of their own society and the systems governing it, even within modern settings. Because of that, this lyric could also be interpreted as describing an era so unstable and mismanaged that the people in power seem incapable of bringing any real sense of guidance or clarity to society. It's as if they're saying that something as simple as lighting up a light for the people in power is something that they're incapable of doing. Kokoro no katachi wo suku. Roughly translates to something along the lines of, the hands that shape the heart are always covered in filth at the end of pain. To me, this lyric speaks about sacrifice, responsibility, and the unavoidable moral stains that come with pursuing with what one believes to be right. In order to build something meaningful or stay true to one's convictions, people often have to sully and dirty their hands in ways that slowly wear away at them on an intrinsic level. The song seems to acknowledge that pain and corruption are not separate from ambition and purpose, but rather they are intertwined. I believe this, of course, heavily applies to Makoto. Since the game focuses heavily on the creation of the Tojo clan, this lyric may be foreshadowing the emotional and moral sacrifices required to create something larger than himself. The dirty hands in this case could symbolize the violence, crime, and suffering that inevitably accompany the construction of an organization born from chaos and bloodshed. It's trying to tell us, the player, that you simply can't get to the top of the world, or the underworld in this case, without bashing a ton of heads and leaving many for dead. Hey there, if you're enjoying the video so far, then why not like and subscribe? It really does help out a small creator like me. It takes a ton of effort to pump out videos like these on a consistent basis, and it would genuinely be really amazing if you could end up supporting me if you'd like. I also stream right on here on YouTube, and I frequently let my viewers know about it via my discussion posts. If that interests you, then please like and subscribe again. Thank you so much. Back to the video. Not a single trace of rust could symbolize Makoto's desire to preserve his inner self despite the increasingly corrupt and violent world surrounding him. Rust is often associated with decay and deterioration over time, and in this case it may represent the emotional and moral corruption that the underworld slowly inflicts upon him. The "I won't let anyone touch me" then further reinforces this idea of protecting one's soul and identity from outside influence, refusing to allow others to manipulate him into becoming something he fundamentally is not. The final line, "I have no intention of bowing down," ties everything together perfectly. Despite the suffering, chaos, and pressuring surrounding him, Makoto continues holding on to his pride and convictions, no matter how unforgiving the world around him becomes. Followed by the echoes till the black light dims. In the cracks of wall feel the weight of old sins. Nothing stays buried, no names, not the word. Die through the silence while the memories blur. Ash on the water and a hush in the air. Men come and go, but few leave a prayer. A secret if you buried a presence in the past. Rumors rise slow, but the truth will move fast. Under lock of death, the name still burned. Don't read between the lies, close your eyes and observe the answer. Followed by the echoes until the black light dims, immediately gives off the feeling of being haunted by the consequences of one's actions. I interpret the echoes as the lingering memories of the people harmed, killed, or emotionally destroyed throughout Makoto's journey. In crime stories especially, violence rarely disappears cleanly. It leaves behind emotional scars, grieving families, and memories that continue following people long after the act itself has passed. Much like real life. I feel that RGG is trying to make sure that this is a point that stays with the player throughout the game itself, and not something that could easily be brushed off, considering that we are actually playing the role of a Yakuza, rather than an associate or someone that has been banished. The black light could then symbolize death itself, suggesting that these echoes continue haunting him until his final moments. In other words, once Makoto fully commits himself to this path, there is no true escape from the emotional weight attached to it. The sins committed in pursuit of survival, ambition, or conviction continue lingering in the background until the light eventually fades completely. In the cracks of the walls feel the weight of old sins. Despite the amount of walls that Makoto makes to build up in order to flush out the noise, it is a fundamental humanistic aspect that there will be vulnerabilities and cracks in said walls. It is within those small gaps where one will feel the weight of their actions crawling on their back. This line essentially speaks about humanity itself, as I'm sure that everyone has had this feeling where they felt like they've either have done something bad or at the very least undesirable when they least expected. They're hit with the sudden pain, that twitch, that uncertainty. Nothing stays buried, no names, not a word. Feels like the song reinforcing the idea that no matter how desperately someone attempts to outrun or suppress their past, it will always find a way to resurface eventually. Actions leave behind consequences, memories and reputations that cannot simply be erased through time alone. What I especially like about this lyric is the inclusion of names and words, because it suggests that even the smallest remnants of the past past are capable of carrying weight. A single name, rumor, or forgotten detail can eventually reopen old wounds or drag hidden truths back into the light. In a world built upon crime, violence, and buried secrets, the past never truly stays dead. Dive through the silence while the memories blur speaks to the isolation that naturally comes with living a life of crime. Despite constantly being surrounded by people, organizations, and more, many characters throughout the Yakuza series often describe the underworld as emotionally lonely and exhausting for those genuinely trapped in it. The silence in this case may symbolize emotional detachment or the inability to openly express one's true feelings, while the blurred memories could represent how years of violence, loss, and survival slowly began to blend together over time. The longer Makoto remains within this world, the harder it is for him to distinguish who he once was from the person he is gradually becoming. Ash on the water and a hush in the air. Now, this next interpretation might admittedly be a bit of a stretch on my part, but ash on the water and a hush in the air makes me think of the way that in certain aspects of organized crime as they attempt to erase evidence of its actions. The imagery of ash being spread across water could symbolize the remains of people, actions, or truths being intentionally scattered and hidden away so that nothing concrete remains behind for the police to see. Meanwhile, the hush in the air feels representative of the silent code that exists within these criminal worlds. Everything operates through secrecy, implication, and unspoken understanding if you are truly serious about surviving within this life. Men come and go, but few leave a prayer. The song acknowledges just how disposable human life becomes within this world. People constantly die, disappear, or are replaced, whether publicly acknowledged or not. Very few are actually able to survive long enough to leave behind something meaningful, whether that be remorse, reflection, or even simple humanity. I mean, just take a look at Kiryu, Daigo, Saejima, and Majima, bro. Like, by the time Infinite Wealth comes by, for example, they are literal husks. Like, many can't even consider them human anymore. The phrase leave a prayer in this context especially stands out to me because prayers are often associated with peace and patience, qualities that feel almost incompatible with the violent and chaotic nature of organized crime. For the average person, prayer may be a normal part of life, but for someone deeply consumed by this underworld, even finding the time or emotional clarity to genuinely reflect may become increasingly rare. In that sense, the lyric almost feels tragic. The longer someone survives within this life, the more difficult it may become to remain spiritually or emotionally intact enough to even leave a prayer behind in the first place. I feel like it could be also referencing respect too. It's been mentioned before in the games, but newer generations, according to the old guard like Saejima and Majima, aren't necessarily in it for the same quote-unquote honorable reasons as they were. A secret if you buried the presence in the past. Feels like it refers to the way people attempt to hide uncomfortable truths by treating them as things that are already over and done with. Once something becomes the past, society often convinces itself that the danger or horror attached to it no longer exists, when in actuality, it still continues. For example, when a criminal is arrested or a violent incident becomes public knowledge, people naturally feel relief because it creates the impression that the problem has already been dealt with. However, what remains are the lingering consequences that continue existing beneath the surface long after public attention disappears. In that sense, the lyric seems to suggest that burying something in the past does not truly erase its presence. Secrets, trauma, and more may temporarily fade from public view, but they continue lingering quietly underneath until they resurface. Rumors rise slow, but the truth will move fast. It appears to suggest that while rumors gradually build over time, the truth eventually arrives with overwhelming force once fully revealed. However, I'll be honest, this is one of the few lines in the song that I personally struggle to fully agree with. Don't get me wrong, it has happened before, but in reality, it's a whole lot more messy. I almost feel like the opposite tends to happen sometimes. Rumors and negativity often spread far quicker than the truth because human beings are naturally wired to react more strongly to emotionally charged or negative information. Not to mention, the truth usually requires, as mentioned earlier, a lot more nuance, context, and patience to fully understand, whereas the former is simple, immediate, and emotionally satisfying for many. That being said, perhaps the lyric is not necessarily talking about speed in a literal sense, but rather impact. Rumors may spread constantly in the background, but when the genuine truth finally surfaces, it can completely overpower and redefine everything that came before it. Under the Lock of Death, the name Still Burn feels like it refers to the idea that even after death, a person's legacy continues living on long after they are gone, whether for better or for worse. The actions someone commits throughout their life eventually become attached permanently to their namesake. In Makoto's case especially, this interpretation becomes especially interesting. Even after his eventual death, his influence will continue echoing throughout history because the very organization he helped create would outlive him by generations. In that sense, Makoto himself becomes immortalized through the world he leaves behind. The imagery of a burning name also again works on multiple levels. On one hand, it could symbolize a name being engraved permanently into history itself, impossible to erase no matter how much time passes. On the other hand, the imagery of burning also carries connotations of punishment, guilt, and hell, reinforcing the possibility that the legacy Makoto leaves behind may not necessarily be a peaceful one. And of course, don't read between the lines, close your eyes and observe the answer. And what feels like a coincidental dig at me personally, as someone who's currently, trying to analyze this entire sort of song, I do think the line carries a deeper meaning beyond simply telling the listener not to overanalyze things. Don't read between the lines could be interpreted as rejecting assumptions, hidden agendas, or artificial narratives, while close your eyes and observe the answer feels intentionally paradoxical. Normally, observation requires sight, yet the lyrics instead suggest that some truths are better understood emotionally or instinctively rather than logically. In a story seemingly centered around identity, suffering, and belonging, perhaps the song is ultimately suggesting that not every answer can be found through pure analysis alone. Some things simply have to be felt.